barriers to growth for me were sort of twofold. One, female, frankly, but two, and I always thought the more important, what's now called social mobility, you know, from a poor working class single parent background. And it wasn't till I was, inverted commas, outed by the Independent on Sunday, who phoned up and said, we're putting you in the pink list this Sunday. And although I had never hid my same-sex partner, you know, I wasn't walking around with the T-shirt. I was always very open and honest when people said, you know, your husband, and I'd say, no, actually, I have a female partner or whatever. But when you appear in print, there's no hiding place. And on the Sunday, I was actually more mortified that I was number 74 on the list. Genuinely mortified. If I'm going to go through this, at least, you know, put me in the top 10. But then I literally went through the list in detail, and there were only 4 commercial people in there. And actually number 88 was Dawn Aries, so I phoned her up and said, but what that did was sort of out me in a more public forum. So although as one of the very few female CEOs of a fully listed public company meant that I was doing all of the city stuff, and apart from all the Dear Mr. Springs that I used to get, which was fine, apart from the Dear Mr. Spring, what a pleasure to meet you. No, try again. It actually felt okay because it was largely UK based. But I think what then got highlighted for me was the international dimension of my role then and subsequent roles. So I think that there is still a massive challenge to managing both reputation and what you're doing within the UK market. In truth, in lots of industries, and certainly in urban metropolitan, in the UK, we can have a comfort now that we didn't have when I first, inverted commas, came out. But as soon as you add an international dimension to that, suddenly I was walking in the shoes of what it feels like to have to think about being out and making a declaration. Because in the same year of the pink list, which was, I think, 2007, I found myself in China. And of course, everybody Googles you and you come up as only number 74 in the pink list. The pink went, but genuinely, you're then forced to expend energy on how do I have this conversation in environments where it's incredibly difficult, incredibly gendered, and let's be honest, quite homophobic. And if I then look back to what's happened since, and the conversation that you and I had was, what's the difference between coming out as a successful business person already, been there, done it, got the T-shirt, and it wasn't comfortable because I was trying to work out how much it had cost me. And it actually cost me financially quite a lot. And I'm looking at Malcolm, who was on my board at the British Council. You know, the selection process for being chairman of the British Council, and I apologise for using the word chairman, I always do. For me, it's gender neutral, like human. And because I do a lot of work in private equity, which we didn't talk about, a lot of work in tech and a lot of work in places where there aren't female chairmen, I always insist on calling myself chairman so that people are forced to accept that it's a job descriptor, which is not gendered. That's my personal hobby horse. I'll get off it now. But you know, when you look round at the impact internationally. It makes a big difference. My interview process included, a sort of microphone shoved in my face and so what are you going to do as a gay woman when you have to go to Saudi Arabia or you have to represent the UK? And that really made me.
And what did you say in that interview?
I blustered a bit, I have to say. I talked about teamwork and I talked about appropriateness and I talked about keeping a conversation open and that I was part of a team and if I wasn't the appropriate member of the team. But then when I think back of my experiences, my self-censorship, so the first time that I went to Egypt, I, did all my stuff and I actually had a lucky break and I had a bit of a triumph. But I was staying on for the weekend. And in my official capacity, I was staying in the ambassador's residence, which is a bit like Buckingham Palace and quite fantastic. But when my partner came over, I said we would move to a hotel for the weekend. And I had pre-selected that choice. But of course, the ambassador was horrified that I had thought that I was trying to avoid any embarrassment, not for him and his wife, but for the staff in the ambassador's residence, because for a lot of them, it would be against their religious beliefs. It would be confronting. And I thought, do I need to be doing this to somebody who's shown me hospitality? Ditto when I was in Bangladesh. I found myself self-censoring because we have to remember that for a lot of colleagues who are either working abroad and living abroad or traveling abroad, it's a bit like going back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and having to think very carefully about disclosure for your own safety as much as anything else. So I was privileged to front up the sort of pride leadership at British Council in the UK and around the world. And when I went to Poland, you sort of think of that as sort of relatively Western, but it was a very hostile environment for our colleagues there who were gay. So walking in those footsteps in an international arena, and actually I have to say, I sort of think of the UK environment as relatively benign. I'm wrong. And only this week, I confronted the most horrific homophobia towards me here in the UK in my current position, with a sort of absolute classic of interviewing with another colleague, interviewing a number of candidates for a job, one of whom, got to be careful not to disclose, one of whom was lesbian and pretty out by some of the things that she had done outside of her work environment. And I thought she was absolutely the outstanding candidate. And the other, my fellow interviewer, was absolutely adamant that she was rubbish. And at one point said to me, "Do you know her?" And I'm like, what? Why would you ask me that when you haven't asked me that about any of the other 5 candidates? Oh, no, I didn't mean that, but does your partner know her? Absolutely horrified. But of course, if I had been coming up through the ranks as a gay woman, I would have been experiencing that. And when I think now of the energy that I would put into that self-censorship and put into thinking about disclosure, because once you've, it's like I chair mind, once you've disclosed a mental illness, you can't bring it back. I've just missed the best bits, Joe, sorry. But you can't, you can't take it back. And one of the things that I think we all need to be respectful of, for all individuals, wherever they cross on an intersectional basis, is what you disclose to whom and when, so that you are in control of it. And I think that's really important. Really important.
I just wondered if anyone's got anything they'd like to say or questions at this point, because there's been quite a lot of content in there, and we can move on and ask other questions. But before we do, would anybody like to ask something? I'll bring you the microphone. It's okay.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about like the cost that now has taken from you in terms of like a professional situation. Do you think you would have gotten to the position that you did beforehand if you were already out in the time that you were coming up the ranks, as you said?
Yeah. So I'm going to do 2 months of that, because one, I was thinking back on, a real cost, financial cost, when one of the jobs that I was doing was I was doing deals in Dubai, and I lost a deal that was worth quite a lot of money to me personally and to my private equity backer, because in almost the final meeting, they said something about my husband, and I said, actually, I have a female partner. And it was almost like these shutters coming down. It's quite extraordinary. In answer to your question about do you think you would have, well, who knows, frankly, because it's all a bit sliding doors. But I think that it's fair to say that I have always felt a bit other because of my background. I was brought up by a single parent who was a father, in a railway flat without a bathroom or a toilet. This sounds a bit like, that sketch, doesn't it? Ooh, lived in a cardboard box. But so when you talk about social mobility, I always think of myself as a poster child for that, and how education, she said, pointing directly at Malcolm as though he was responsible, gives you choices and lifts you out of that. But still, you're confronted with that otherness. I mean, my very, very, very first job as a lawyer in-house, the marketing director got fired, and the CEO and chairman called me in. I was working in the in-house law department, the Mills Reeve people here, and called me in and said, oh, we've had to fire whatever his name was, and we need somebody to caretake marketing. Please can you do it because you're on project work so we can release you? And I was absolutely horrified. And I said, I know absolutely nothing about marketing. And the chairman said, Stevie, marketing is common sense. You're common, so you're common. Yeah. I mean, actually, he did me a favour because I took it like a duck to water, but I was absolutely mortified. It reminded me as a kid when my aunt said to my grandmother, I don't know why you bother with them because you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, and all of that otherness, and you don't deserve to be in the room and you don't deserve a seat at the table. I'm not doing a hierarchy of perceived disadvantage or actual disadvantage, but I have always felt a bit other. I've always felt as though I've got to try harder and do better. And when you look at most career trajectories, you need talent, you've got to work hard, but you also need luck. And 2 out of 3 don't do it. You've got to have all 3 to get to the very top. So the answer is no. I'd like to think yes, but when you think about the hard work bit of that, if I'd have been putting 20% of my brain into hiding myself or having to double think, how was my weekend and what did I do, and the gendered and nuanced answers that I would be looking to, I don't know whether I could have got there. I like to think yes, but I couldn't answer that. Good question.
Really good question. Any more thoughts on this? Okay.
So I guess the things that probably drove you a few years ago, looking back at that history versus now, are very different. I'd say, what were the main things that were sort of drivers in terms of values or anything else that sort of made you successful then versus now, and how has that changed?
So I genuinely don't think it has, because I think that your values are instilled early. So forgive anybody who's heard this already, but single parent family, dad, no money, but worked for the railways. So we had free tickets everywhere. And we used to go anywhere to see something that was free. And when I was about 7, my sister wanted a bicycle. My dad sat us down and said, okay, we earn, how long ago it was, £3.10. 10 was 50p, 10 shillings. £3.10, the rent's this, blah, 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 which leaves us this much to do things like holiday or buy a bicycle. If we buy a bicycle, only Sandy benefits. And if we go to Butlins, we all enjoy it, so let's have a vote. And we had a vote, and we all voted for Butlins. And that's quite important because it grew into a weekly meeting, because we used to get paid weekly, a weekly meeting, official family board meeting, which was a discussion, if I put it into corporate speak, about asset allocation, what we were going to spend on what, learning board dynamics, learning how to make an argument. They were quite short, but they were very intense, and they were very grown up, and my dad treated both of us as though our opinion mattered. And my dad was obviously the chairman. My sister was the secretary. I was the treasurer because I was good at sums. The dog was the committee. We had proper minutes, which, by the way, my dad wrote. And that was the first learning. He who writes the minutes controls the meeting. But after, it was probably about 18 months, he added AOB at the end. And under AOB, we would discuss C&D, we would discuss the National Health Service, we would discuss what would now be termed as equity, inclusion, social justice, all of that stuff that actually stays with you. So I believe that my moral compass was set then, and from the age of 16 to now, and you all know that I'm now 67 because you've worked it out. From the age of 16, I had a not-for-profit role because I was a junior trustee at an organisation called FAB. I know we've got a wheelchair user somewhere in the room, so physically handicapped and able-bodied, as was. And I got my first paycheck then as well. And all the way through my career, I have always had a not-for-profit role and for-profit roles, plural, without a break. And for the last 30 years, chairing not-for-profits. So Groundwork, smiling at some ex-Groundwork colleagues in the back. I was chairman of Groundwork, and then I was Madam Pudsey, I was chairman of Children in Need for the BBC. I moved colleagues up to Media City. I was chairman of Mind, still am, chairman of the British Council, alongside roles that paid me ridiculous amounts of money on occasion to do commercial work. But I always thought that I would take my social justice lens into my commercial work. And it was only really when I went portfolio, as they say in the trade, I gave up full-time CEO work to be chairing and non-executive, that it all came together. So if you look at my portfolio, you know, the British Council, big commercial organisation, uses the surplus to do good work elsewhere in the world. Co-op group, you know, the Cooperative Society, 11 billion turnover, does commerciality differently for the good of the communities in which it operates. Mind, 200 shops, the profits from that go into making sure that nobody lives with a mental health crisis alone. So if I sort of look at what I do, and I chair EDI for Plazis, which is, you will probably know it as McVitie's and Godiva and Jacobs and
all the good stuff.
all the good stuff. But it's a Turkish company, Turkish owned. So you can imagine some of the EDI challenges within that international sphere, big operation in Saudi. So the stuff that I do now comes from that. And I don't think that's changed in 60 years.
Yeah. Good answer, good question as well. We had another question right at the
These are
back.
very, very long answers. I apologise unreservedly.
You'd be ready for this one, Stevie. Sure.
Actually answered quite a lot of the questions.
Hello, Justin. How are you?
Good, thank you. One of the interesting things that you were saying is how that, a door closed for you and to buy an equity, investor. Do you realise how many doors might have opened? Are you conscious of calls that come out, in your sphere and the work that you do? Do you recognise some doors that have opened for you?
That's a brilliant question, and I can give you a real life current example of I have just taken over this year chairing PRS for Music, which is very rock and roll and very great, and I get to go to the Brits and all that sort of stuff. But it's basically a rights exploitation organisation, and I was just saying I'm very proud of the fact that it processes 3 times as many transactions as Visa does. So it's sort of big and important, and it's creative, and I love it. And the interview process was horrific. Absolutely horrific. But when I met the CEO, who did not have a vote in it, to be fair, but she was quite excited by the fact that I might be able to sit in front of the 700 colleague base and lead on pride, because they didn't have anybody. Yeah. So I think that probably was. And because obviously I'm rubbish and underqualified, but I actually think it was a benefit to have representation of the community at a senior level, which amazingly they didn't have on the board, never mind at chairman level.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think it was an advantage. Thank you, Lindy.
Just a quick question: did the lesbian get the job?
I can't answer that. I can tell you that she is through to the next round.
Well done, Stevie.
I presume there must have been at least some level of fear about what kind of opportunities will probably be, now doors that are being closed. How did you deal with that, and what kind of support did you have to get through that to where you are now?
Yeah. So I would say a couple of things to that. My partner was incredibly worried about it. Incredibly worried about it.
Your partner was always gay, wasn't she? That was,
yeah.
So she had more experience
of it. She was gay at the age of 7. So, it was slightly different. And therefore had grown up as a gay woman, and she's CEO of a not-for-profit. But was very careful about her sexuality coming through, even in not-for-profit, even based in Manchester. And she was terribly worried about me and the backlash. And it was me who was saying, maybe, ignorance is bliss. No, I cannot live my life like this. I have always been authentic. I've always been what you see is what you get. And frankly, if you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine. But she was incredibly worried about the backlash, particularly from the city, because I had purposefully and always been incredible, because there are so few women CEOs trouncing around the city. I had always overcompensated. I would never wear trousers to a meeting in the city. I would always go full face, skirt or dress. If I'm going to be memorable, at least remember me for that. And she was very worried about it. What made it very easy was my sister, who was like, go for it. And my support structure. So my friends absolutely fell in love with Lindy on site. And now the catchphrase, certainly amongst all of my female friends, bar none, is, and I quote, everybody needs a Lindy, which is quite sweet. I mean, not least because she can mend things and change tires and all that, but more the emotional support that comes from a partner who is in tune. So I think I was incredibly lucky. I have a very, very, very strong support network, and the confidence of, I spent a long time wanting to be loved, wanting to be liked, even by people that I didn't like or didn't rate or didn't respect. And it was probably around the age of about 40 that I thought, why do I care what you think about me? Because I don't have a high regard for you. So why should I have a high regard for your opinion? And that was liberating. That was completely liberating. But I think a support structure is important. And now, as chairman of Mind, I am incredibly aware of some of the very lonely journeys that some members of the community go through. I mean, from my own, forget about Mind, my next door neighbour, her brother killed himself a year ago, struggling with his sexuality all his life. She did not know he was gay. My partner's niece, her fiance's sister, took her own life a month ago. And unbeknownst to him, she had been struggling with her sexuality and just couldn't cope. So from my limited network in a year, there are 2 people who have felt that the world would be better without them. And that is just horrific. And when I look at the programs that Mind runs and supports for the community, particularly in peer groups, because actually knowing that you're not alone is half the battle. It really is half the battle. You have a long list of questions.
I've got questions. They're boring.
My name is Julie Macaulay.
I know we've met and I have your picture in my bag.
Really for everybody else. Honestly, your story is compelling, and thank you for sharing. I want to go back to your narrative about censorship, and I'm sure that many of us have had to censor ourselves, especially when we're in very unfamiliar environment. You talked about the censorship in Egypt. Was there anything? You also talked about the staff, your religious beliefs, whether that will affect the way that they will treat you. How did they treat you in the end?
I didn't give them the opportunity. And that's my self-censorship. If I had gone back for a second trip, I wouldn't have forced them, or rather I wouldn't have presumed that it would have been a problem. So I'm sort of embarrassed to say I didn't give them the option. It was only after the event that I said, this is the reason that I booked a hotel, and it wasn't me rejecting your generous hospitality. And I knew that the ambassador and his wife would not have had a problem, but I was very worried about, the staff there. Yeah, when I was in Poland and I was doing a joint talk with our Ukrainian colleagues after the war had started. So, it was a tense conversation. But there were both Ukrainian and Polish colleagues there who were from the community, and they felt able to come up to me afterwards and talk about it, which made me feel very proud. Very proud, because I could have easily self-censored there. But I think there does come a point, and maybe the point is 60, there does come a point when you've got to stand up and be candid. And that's much easier to do from a position of power, influence, and recognition than it is halfway up.
Yeah.
So I do take the responsibility quite seriously.
I mean, this is one of the topics that came up for us when we started Pride in Leadership. We had our very first conversation where we'd just realised that each other was gay, but Matt was about to go to Russia to do a talk. And we did this big announcement. We're starting Pride in Leadership. We didn't call it that then. We're starting Pride in Leadership. And then the week after, you had to go to Russia. And you were a bit afraid of that, weren't you? But part of what we discussed was, at least there's some people to talk about now, to talk about it with now that we've got this network together. And so I suppose...
That was exactly my timing in China. The pink list, it was literally a month before I had to go to China.
Yeah, but all of your social media, which you got to submit to get a visa.
Well,
yeah.
it wasn't even the social media, it was in the mainstream press, and therefore Googled straight up. The first thing that came up when you Googled Stevie Spring was number 74.
I'd like to... I just want to thank G-Day for his question. This is G-Day's first Pride in Leadership meeting, and I think it's the first one you've been to. But G-Day's doing a lot of campaigning, LGBT rights campaigning in Africa as well, aren't you, G-Day? So if anyone has any questions for him afterwards that you want to talk to him about, he's doing really great work. Do we have any more questions on this area? I have a question for you, which is, obviously you've had this extremely successful career. Is there anything you wish you'd done differently? Doesn't have to be about gay stuff, just done differently, or any tips you can give people in the room for building their careers?
So this is where I start thinking, shouldn't I regret reality? No, I won't do that. But there is part of me, I was saying on the sliding doors bit, I think if you are comfortable in your skin and feel content, I won't say happy because that's a sort of different. I'm happy, but content I think is more important than happy because it's deeper. With where you are and who you are and how you have become who you are, it's very, very difficult to regret. Because again, sliding doors moments. I wish this deal had gone through, and I've had all this money. No, I wish this deal had gone through, or I wish. I wouldn't be where I am now. And if I am content and happy with where I am now, then you can't have regret because you wouldn't be there. You'd have got on the tube, or you got thrown off the bus, or run over, or whatever. And I think part of that contentment is when we assess our own success. For me, it's all about the comparator group. It's so easy to go, I'm Barack Obama. I'm not a success because Trump as president had more money than me. I'm David Beckham. I've never won Wimbledon. I'm not, depends who you compare yourself to. And I think when you break success down into little tiny component parts, I'm not as wealthy as, I haven't done that. You concentrate on what you haven't done rather than what you have done. You are always going to be a failure. Whereas if you look at your life holistically, and this is, I think, where contentment comes in, I always think that there are three legs to that stool. Work is an important part of the three-legged stool because it gives us all sort of, a sense of achievement and a sense of pride and a sense of putting back and a sense of doing stuff. But so family, and in family I include friends and community because we adopt family, don't we? It's not just blood family. And then the third leg for me is community and legacy and putting back. Because it's very easy to see that as altruistic, but it never is, because it's about payback as well. It's about, am I going to leave the planet better than when I arrived? Will I have made a difference to people's lives? Have I made an impact? Have I made a difference? Have I used my voice for good? And I think if you sort of triangulate, I'm mixing up my metaphors appallingly, but if you triangulate through that, success is different for everybody. And that's where contentment comes. So I think if you then come back and say, what do I regret? If I say, oh, I regret doing that, I regret not being a PE teacher because they forced me to go to law because I was quite good at Latin recitation. Quae compitasint Catalina, perge proco episte.
Yeah.
E credere aliquando exorde patent ortae proficiscere. Just saying. But if I had become a sports instructor rather than a lawyer, would that have been different? If the deal had gone through and I'd made that big pile of money, would my life have been, So no, I don't regret.
Very good. Yes.
Probably should, but I don't.
Thank you so much for your story. It is incredible to hear another Bible son. I know there's a lot of us, but we don't like to speak out very much.
I was forced, can I just say? This is not a volunteering.
I know, for me, I try and do as much as I can at work. I've got loads of sort of moments and things that I'm really happy that I've done. But a big thing for me personally, you go to work and you do your work, and that's fine, then you come home. And sometimes it's hard to maintain your composure and whatnot. But a few weeks ago, my 11-year-old son casually dropped into conversation, just came out to me. Pansexual. And part of me thought, yeah, I'm going to quit, it's great. There's more of us.
Here's what I prepared earlier.
I made that. But to me, sort of putting aside all the commercial successes, all the great stuff I've done, it was that innocent moment that made me think, you know what, I am a good person, I'm doing a good thing. You've had such a great story, it's been fantastic to hear. You have a moment where you think, I did that.
What, without crying? Oh my gosh. I'm tempted to say that I've had lots and lots and lots and lots of those because I've been incredibly lucky. And I think it's part, if I come back to this sort of dual career since the age of 16, it means I've had 2 careers. So I haven't had 45 years experience, I've had 90 years experience, and therefore been able to make 90 years worth of impact or difference. So I've had lots and lots and lots of, so I think in my time I raised £500 million for children in need. And I was the one who set up the dedicated mental health fund for young people prior to joining Mind. So that was a sort of through. I was really, really proud of that. I've been, in fact, you forced me to think that my not-for-profit career is much easier to point at. I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud that I've made a difference there. But actually then when I think back on board work, I can point at big things that I've made a difference, but actually the ones that get to you are the individuals, because they have a much greater effect. When you go, I promoted you, now you're a superstar. You know, I gave you time out when you were struggling, and now look at you. And I have lots and lots and lots of those. And I count myself as lucky to have had a platform to make change. I mean, only last week I was at a thing in the House of Commons on intersectionality, inclusion in the workplace, and what changes we need to make to allow a whole group of people who are currently excluded back into the workplace. And I get that platform, not sadly from the not-for-profit, but from the for-profit. So because I'm chairman of this and chairman of that and chairman of that and a couple of that gives me a voice. And using it to make a difference gives me massive joy. So there are lots.
So here's our last question then, because we're running out of time. What, if you could advise us all, what can we do? What's the one thing or two things or three things that we should do leaving this room tonight to either enhance our career or take us forward or to have more of an impact?
Can I have more than one?
Yeah, have as many as you want.
So
I'm not in charge at all.
the first piece of advice that I give from my own career is just because you haven't doesn't mean you can't. So when people ask me if I can scuba dive, I don't say no, because I haven't. I say probably, because I can equalise and I'm a good swimmer and I'm not scared to be under the water, so why shouldn't I be able to do it? And that's all about skills transference. And I think we need to have the confidence to say yes. Not, these are the 5 things I'm looking for, I can only do 2 of them. But these are the 5 things they're looking for, I can do 2 of them and I can probably do the other 3. And part and parcel of that for me is making sure that you get a breadth of experience. You know, the answer is yes, no, what's the question? Because I think the other thing that we all do is conflate 10 years experience or 5 years experience with 1 year repeated 5 times or 10 times. And your learning curve in a new job or a new role or a new project is so much greater, and then it plateaus. So if you continue to do new things, get thrown in the deep end, learn to sink or swim, your experience curve is exponential and your value as a generalist increases exponentially. So I think that you know, when you are considering your annual reviews or what you're doing, be very, very careful of that, because from a corporate perspective, it's much better for you to, you're brilliant in the role that you're in. And because you've done it 4 times already, you'll be brilliant at it next year and you're making my life easier. But I want to stretch you and I want you to try new things. I want you to go out of your comfort zone and have permission to fail and try new things. So when you're doing assessments, I would push very hard for that, for new experiences, for new trials, you know, you don't know until you've done it. So that would be my second big
Great.
thing. That's probably enough. We've probably run out of time. You're probably sick of the sound of me, so I'll stop there. Thank you for
Could you
having me.
please give Stevie a massive round of applause?